Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the honour of inviting me today to speak in front of the Bruges Group conference and to fellow British people who, like me, are deeply concerned about the way that this nation is having to face the challenges coming from Europe. It is also an honour to speak here today in this great hall, the Hall of King's College London, a wonderful university. Although I didn't attend, there are many great people who have. Famous alumni like Lord Lister and Florence Nightingale. As you see on the picture as you're coming in, Desmond Tutu, a man who also fought against people who were trying to suppress the rights and freedoms of individuals, as we are having to face today. I also noticed that Rory Bremner was actually an alumni of this college as well. And I just kept on thinking to myself how wonderful it would be to have a programme where Rory was satirising the European bureaucrats. I think I would pay to watch a programme called Bremner on Brussels. But it is also an important university for a more profound reason. It was founded on the great British principles of defending liberty of the people and defending the country's national interests. Amongst those who founded it was the first Duke of Wellington. Wellington, as we know, in 1815, led the British forces at a time when British national interests were being challenged from a European nation that wanted to implement Napoleonic rule of law, that wanted to implement a Napoleonic standard of business, effectively creating a Napoleonic standard of regulation on Britain. But Wellington led those forces to defeat that attack at Waterloo, and that defeat led to something that is characteristic of the British people. We were then able to go on for 100 years of trade and business success that led to the empire. It led to the improvement of British people's qualities of lives. It led to the financial security of our nation at that time. The Battle of Waterloo was in a place that is now part of Belgium. And once again, we find ourselves as the British people facing an attack from Belgium, this time in the face of the European Commission. Before me, I see the willing troops, the people who recognise the dangers of what Europe can bring to us. And I, in terms of the financial services, see that effort every day. Professor Vaughan is excellent, I have to say, on producing the type of regulations that I see coming across my desk, and increasingly so, that affects our British industry. He's highlighted increasingly how there is a trade war going on, directed from Europe at controlling our British business. This is not about regulation, it is about control. Control of the British financial services. Control of our ability to make money. Control about how we spend our taxes. And they are aiming every single day to ensure that a Napoleonic or French or European model is imposed upon ourselves. So when I was asked to speak today about financial services, clearly you're concerned. You cannot not notice that there is an environment at the moment where bankers are not liked, or indeed myself, working in a hedge fund industry. It's the first time I can actually talk to my mother and say, look, Mum, I'm a bad boy. I work in a hedge fund. But actually, when one analyses the financial services industry, it isn't simply the gleaming towers of Canary Wharf or the city slickers walking around the streets of London. The financial services industry in this country is an integral part of every town and every city. It plays a role in all our lives. It's important in creating finance and jobs for our country. Edinburgh has always had a strong fund management industry, and despite the aftermath of HBOS and RBS, it still has world-class companies and professionals. Leeds and Manchester, my hometown, have always had long-established insurance and banking businesses such as the Cooperative Bank. But they are also home to investment brokers, corporate finance firms and property lending businesses. Building societies, a very British invention, but is successful and still important to many millions of mortgage payers, are major employers in Cheltenham, Gloucester, Bristol and Birmingham. Other towns and cities, Stockport, Milton Keynes, Chester, Bath, have successful financial services industries based around leasing and credit cards. There are few towns and cities, ladies and gentlemen, that are not affected by the financial services industry. So every time we bash the bankers, every time that we hurt the fund managers, every time we criticize, we're criticizing our own. We're criticizing the ability of those businesses to create the jobs and the finances to move us out of this particular recession. We should be proud of our successful industries that we have here, and we should be supporting those industries against the attack that they're facing every single day from Europe. Because those businesses are examples of what is great about the British people. When we are allowed and able to exert our ingenuity, our skill, our forthrightness without the powers of regulation, preventing ourselves from move forward, we create successful businesses. In the UK, the financial services industry has approximately 1.1 million jobs directly involved. But we also have millions of jobs indirectly involved in the classic ones of law, accounting, recruitment, but also in security, building, cleaning companies that are connected with those. In the financial year 2009, financial services contributed £61.4 billion to the UK exchequer. That's 12.1% of our all government receipts. How many schools and hospitals, fire stations, police stations, pensions for people who are having to work in our civil servants are paid for out of that. We mustn't forget that we all work together in one large team. It's UK PLC. And so that is one of our team players helping to sustain the rest of our players. The City of London is recognised as #1 in many markets. Where we do not have successful industries many years ago, we do now. Sectors like private equity, where in the UK, 75% of all European private equities funds are based here. 80% of all European hedge funds are based here. Our fund managers can challenge Switzerland as a place of expertise. We host the European head offices of almost all the major investment banks. We have the greatest share of the banking clearing houses. We have Lloyd's insurance markets and some of the best known names in insurance in the world, such as Prudential, Aviva and Legal & General. British innovation, skill and entrepreneurship, backed by our independently minded government choosing its own regulation and direction, has given the industry the framework to succeed. So therefore, is it any wonder, ladies and gentlemen, that Europe is jealous and envious of our success? Professor Vogel has clearly marked out what is behind that envy and that success and what they're attempting to do. Make Britain more costly and expensive a place to do business, and suddenly the French, the Spanish and the Greeks are more able to compete with us. I don't think they will, but they will try bloody hard to ensure that they do, because we still have the entrepreneurial spirit. So what does Europe intend to do, and why is it bad for ourselves and as a nation, and why is it bad for the industry as a whole? I don't wish to go into too great detail about the numbers of regulations. You clearly saw that for yourself. I'd actually simply say that is only those regulations that Professor Vogel put on behind us, only 6 of the most damaging regulations that I've had to face in the last year. I'm aware of 22 new pieces of directives that are planned to attack us. First of all, we have to challenge the thought of the philosophy that is being emanated out of the European Commission. The crisis was caused by the banks and fund managers in this nation. The crisis is an Anglo-Saxon failure and a failure of capitalism. It wasn't regulated enough. These are all patently untrue. Hedge funds and private equities did not cause the crash. Professor Vogel has clearly identified the 2 key reasons. And one of those reasons was regulation. The crisis occurred in a period in history in which we are the most regulated environment ever. And yet, we see the European community wanting to create a new regulator, an Uber regulator in the European Securities and Markets Authority. Are we really convinced in their arguments that they suggest that this new European Uber regulator can control and prevent another financial crash? If the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US, if the Financial Services Authority in the Bank of England in the UK, if CISA in France, if all the regulators in the world were not able to prevent this crisis, who is going to explain to me and convince me that 26 regulators, some of them who've never had the experience of what we've had to go through, will be able to do it again? Ladies and gentlemen, it's not simply about regulating, it's about control of our financial services industry. And if we didn't have their control, if we didn't have European regulation, we would have been able to handle this particular crisis better. We know that in days of old, the Bank of England had the ability to act as a lender of last resort. When Northern Rock was facing its run and the issues there, the actual sums involved were minor. They were minor compared to the amounts of money that we now hear swung around in terms of the billions and the hundreds of billions that are being put out in quantitative easing. But the argument put forward by the Bank of England for not saving Northern Rock was that, effectively, the European rules and regulations on competition emanating from Neelie Kroes was that it would have been anti-competitive for us to be able to save one of our own banks. Before, we'd have been able to simply hand over or be able to control the inflow and outflow of capital for Northern Rock, save that bank, save the jobs, prevent a run, and prevent the damage. But it was European regulation that prevented it. We now know that we've got a European super regulator that's being planned, and I don't wish to go into that and cross over the lines of Professor Vogel. But I do want to talk about the Alternative Investment Fund Managers Directive, something that affects ourselves directly. Mention those simple four letters of the Alternative Investment Fund Directive, or the AIFD, and you'll perhaps get other four letters thrown back to you from members of the City of London. It is a dreadful piece of regulation. It is a piece of regulation that it aims to attack our successful businesses. Its aims are to ban European investors from being able to have the freedom to choose which funds that they're going. It aims to control, in certain circumstances, the capital and borrowing that firms can do. It aims to ensure that other countries in Cayman or BVI or Hong Kong and the US have a unified regulation that's similar to the Europeans, otherwise we're not allowed to trade with them or have funds that come from them. It aims to actually control the remuneration of our employees within this UK and give restrictions on a whole host of business decisions. It's actually a charter to send British business abroad. Just over a decade ago, ladies and gentlemen, the UK did not have significant influence in private equity and hedge funds. Today, they directly employ 40,000 people and provide £5.3 billion in tax to the UK Exchequer. That's 200,000 nurses, 45,000 hospital consultants, 145,000 teachers. In 2 years alone, the tax just generated from these two particular industries will be capable of paying for the whole of the London 2012 Olympic Games. Again, this directive is not aimed at preventing future crises. It's an aim of control of our financial services and our income. ESMA, the European Securities Uber Regulator, and the AFID are just two of many directives that I've mentioned. Their aim is to control, as I suggest. But it's also a charter to try and send business away. Many people have said this many times at all. I spoke recently with Martin Wheatley, the head of the SFC in Hong Kong. He has indicated that over 100 hedge funds have established themselves in Hong Kong in recent times. And part of that is the attack on the remuneration elements of the financial services sector. We don't see Wayne Rooney being told that every time you don't score a goal for Manchester United, or rather you're scoring a goal elsewhere, that we're going to take 50% of your salary. Perhaps we ought to. Quite frankly, he earns enough to be able to pay the national debt of many a small country. But we do know that the effect is severe. When Michael Goguen of HSBC is suggesting that he will take the headquarters of HSBC to Hong Kong, we have to stand up and listen. Because when they take head offices away, we take serious capital, we take employees who have the intelligence, and we take away the tax capabilities for this country. We have to be aware that as Europe tries to raise costs. We are the ones who are going to face it. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a recession, the first time that many people have seen a recession this bad. Many of us, like myself, saw something similar in the 80s. Swathes of our industrial titans and industries were laid low. Millions lost their jobs and thousands their homes. We have different causes then, but the same effect today. But however, throughout this particular time, the spirit of the British people has always remained. Our redoubtable creativity, enterprise skill and forward thinking have been challenged to the full, and we've always managed to fight back and pull ourselves out of the recession. Our financial services industry, unhindered by regulation and prevented from Europe, will be able to help this country once more. What I would like to say is that when I face this in terms of financial services, I see that the European project is being run by a small group of people with vested interests to keep themselves in a job when many of us are losing ours. What I see them is them protecting their own pensions and increasing their salaries when many of us are having to lose pensions rights or see our pensions decline. I see the Europeans creating regulations which ensure that they have nice schools being created privately while we're having to watch our schools programs being cut. We see a government here that is trying to cut £80 billion in terms of the budget deficit, but by removing ourselves from Europe, we'll be able to pay for that within 4 or 5 years ourselves. The time is to come out of Europe, ladies and gentlemen, because the time is now. And what we see in terms of financial services is that we would expect, amongst our other industries, to be protected. Protected by our governing class. Protected by those in Whitehall. Protected by those who are sitting in government, elected by ourselves to protect our industries. But we're not seeing that. They're allowing the control. They are surrendering our control to Europe. Labour and Liberals alike have been supporting this project for many, many a year. And it is sad, it's heartbreaking for me to see that the Conservative Party is doing exactly the same. We were promised that if there is going to be a change in the treaties, that we would get a vote for a referendum. Already that promise is being taken away. Ladies and gentlemen, we should be fighting for that referendum, because we are the vanguard. We are the people who are sitting there facing Europe, and we should be talking to our friends, talking to our neighbours, talking to our businessmen, and make them have our referendum. A referendum that I know that the British people would vote for, and vote for coming out of Europe. In 1588, ladies and gentlemen, I know I keep going back to some historical elements, Elizabeth I gave a speech to the people, to the troops at Tilburn as the Armada approached. She said, "I know that I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king of England." Well, ladies and gentlemen, we today are the troops facing an army of European bureaucracy. And the indifference brought on by our coalition government shows that they don't have the heart and the stomach for this fight. Well, we must ensure that they get the heart and the stomach for this fight. We must ensure that we feed them with the energy and ability to take on Europe, because without doing that, our industries will decline, our financial services will go, and we will be in a serious problem. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.